All right. Oh, I have to check my microphone. Hello. Hello. Seems to be working. Well, anyway. All right. Admit all. All right. Hi, everyone.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
Hello.
All right. So, let's just wait one more minute so that everybody's here. Everyone that's going to be here anyway. And then just a couple quick housekeeping things, and then we'll get on to the main lecture, which is, of course, mediumship, ghost hunting, and communication with the dead. Not necessarily in that order. Okay. All right. It's 2:35. Let's just get to it. All right. So just a couple things. I've uploaded a few chapters for the next lecture after this one. Not all of them are required reading. I've decided that for the cryptozoology lecture, I know it's kind of low-hanging fruit, but we're going to do Bigfoot. Just because it's fun to talk about. So there's 3 chapters from Loxton and Prothero's book, Abominable Science, which is all about cryptozoology. The intro, or rather chapter 1 and chapter 7, are optional, but if you don't read them for tomorrow, I do recommend you sort of keep them on the back burner for the rest of the class or for your final paper, because they actually sort of generalize to some of the other things that we'll be talking about, some of the things that are said in those chapters. I'll talk a bit more about this on Thursday's lecture, but some of what they say about Bigfoot hunting, the Bigfoot hunting culture, Bigfoot hunting communities, certainly applies to all manner of paranormal investigative communities. So we're talking UFO hunters, we're talking ghost hunters, like we'll be talking about today. So those 2 chapters will be good to keep on the back burner. Chapter 2 is about Bigfoot proper, and it iterates all the sorts of interesting lines of evidence for Bigfoot that have been acquired over the years, and why I'd say most, if not all, of those lines of evidence are somewhat suspect. Anyway, so that's for Thursday. So just when you're looking at those readings, I've indicated which are optional and which are recommended. For today, of course, it's mediumship, ghost hunting, and communicating with the dead. So we'll be covering a little bit of the beginning of chapter 21 from Blackmore, which we didn't talk too much about last time. And then a lot about the sort of tail end of chapter 9, which I realize might have seemed like a bit of a funny reading. You might have been like, why are we reading this chapter on freedom of the will and the experience of conscious will? But of course, if you read the whole chapter and you got to the end, the bit where we start talking about the Idiomotor Effect, then you can see the relevance of that material for what we'll be discussing today. So let's just get the slides going here. Got my funny slides that do weird animations at the beginning. I've got to stop putting those in. Oh, okay. Windows didn't like that. Let's try it again. Let's just start here. Sorry, guys, I have a very slow computer. There we go. Okay, so this is the first slide, the first proper slide. Slide number 2. Just recall a few of the things that we've kind of kept coming back to, a few of the philosophical ideas, right? Like metaphysical naturalism. Remember that if you're a metaphysical naturalist, you're probably a physicalist or a materialist, right? This is a kind of substance monism, a metaphysical position that there is only one kind of substance, physical stuff. So only matter and energy and their associated properties exist. There aren't any gods or spirits or anything like that. And of course, the mind is also contingent on the physical. So the mind here depends upon the brain. So there's no soul or anything like that. Another thing that I often forget to drop in here is the fact that on, well, I'd say metaphysical or methodological naturalism, and certainly physicalism, another important thing is that everything works according to laws that we can identify, right? So there's physical stuff, and that's all that exists. But that physical stuff behaves in certain kinds of ways that we can figure out, for example, by using the scientific method. So not only is nature all there is, and nature is just what is physical, but what is physical works according to physical laws, right? That's important here. And that's just something I thought I should mention because I often forget to stick that in there. So substance monism, in particular physicalism, we've contrasted already in this class with substance dualism, right? And of course, that's due to Descartes. Descartes famously believed in two different substances. So we have extended substance, you'll recall, which is matter. And physicalists would say, yes, this is actually all that there is in terms of substance, not in terms of, knowledge about how the substance works. And of course, Descartes also believed that mind or thinking substance is non-physical. So it's essentially the soul, right? And this is kind of this is stuff that a lot of the philosophers in the class will be familiar with. It's also really not that surprising, given Descartes' background. He was educated as a Jesuit, which is kind of like a philosopher priest, if you like, a sort of like Catholic philosopher priest, or theologian or something like that. He also practiced law and was, of course, a scientist. So Descartes' interesting because you have this sort of mechanistic view of the universe that was typical of the day. It was very similar to the mechanistic views of his contemporaries, like Thomas Hobbes or Galileo, right? But Descartes retains the soul. And of course, only humans have this rational soul. We have machine bodies, but we have immortal souls as well. Animals, on the other hand, are just machines. Descartes called them beast machines, the bête machine. So there's a little bit of recap for you. Oops. This is an old idea. Obviously, we attribute it to Descartes because Descartes is the so-called father of modern philosophy. But of course, as I mentioned last time, this idea is very old. It goes all the way back to Plato. Plato and Descartes both believed that the soul, the rational soul, would survive death. Descartes believed, of course, that he believed in the sort of Christian worldview, right? I suppose if you you die, and if you've been good, then I guess you go to heaven or something. If not, maybe you go to purgatory or hell or something like that, right? Plato actually advocates this interesting idea called the transmigration of the soul, which is kind of like reincarnation in the Hindu tradition. It's not exactly the same, of course, but it's similar. That's what it reminds a lot of people of. What Plato says about the soul through Socrates, of course. He uses the character Socrates. Yes, let's do a live transcription. Whoops. Okay, go away. Blocking myself. There. Yes. Chat. Oh, you're welcome. Okay. What was I saying?
What Plato says of the soul through Socrates.
Oh, right. It's all through Socrates. If you want to know more, check out the Phaedo. It's a dialogue that recounts the last hours of Socrates as told by his friends. Plato was not there, actually. We're told in the dialogue that Plato is ill and absent. So he probably wasn't there. If you look at the famous painting by David, The Death of Socrates, Plato is in that painting, but that's probably just artistic license from David. He was working centuries after any of this would have taken place. Anyway, what does all of this have to do with ghosts? Well, it's probably a little bit obvious at this point, right? If you are a dualist like Descartes or Plato, and you think that if the material body can die, but the immaterial soul can survive that, well, perhaps an immaterial soul that gets stuck in the earthly realm, that might refer to a ghost, right? And that's what the word means in English, right? The word ghost refers to the spirit of someone who has died, but that's still hanging around, right? Now, of course, there are reports of ghost hauntings that go back all the way to antiquity. Some of the earliest records of haunted locales we have come from antiquity, from ancient Greek sources, from Roman sources, or farther back we have Persian, probably Egyptian, and of course these are universal as well. Humans are, or we seem to be, sort of like natural born dualists, as Blackmore discusses elsewhere in her book on consciousness. And if that's true, and think here of the animism and the animacy and animism from our earlier discussions of Jung and Freud, it makes sense why we see so many reports of hauntings and encounters with ghosts all around the world, and all the way back into the past, into the distant past. Of course, not all ghosts or accounts of ghosts are similar across the world. I'm thinking here of something that a few of my students in previous iterations of this class have taught me about in their papers. In the West, we have ideas of ghosts that inhabit old haunted locales, and the idea seems to be, or at least a common trope in storytelling about ghosts, is that ghosts are spirits of deceased persons who have unfinished business, right? And that's why the ghost is still there. Now, this could be maybe because the person was murdered or killed, or, you know, it's usually some sad story and the ghost is hanging around because it's got some unfinished business. But there's lots of other ideas about ghosts from all around the world. One that comes out of Asia, which is kind of rooted in the Buddhist tradition, is the idea of a hungry ghost. And I'm just curious if anyone is familiar with this hungry ghost.
Gabor Mate talks about it. He has a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. I don't know. I can't remember what it's talked. I can't remember off the top of my head alludes to, but
so without again, because I'm also a little bit sketchy on the details, it has something to do with your karma, right? If you've lived a life and you've accumulated bad karma, you know, what are the four, let's just go back a bit. What are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism? Anybody? Existence is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. And then what's the third and fourth? Oh, I always get sketchy on them. Existence is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. Let's see what they say in the chat. Right? You've got, yeah, that's one of them too. Suffering can be, I think that's the fourth one. If you follow the Noble Eightfold Path. Anyway, the first two are important, right? Existence is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. So if you live yeah, that's right. If you can follow the Eightfold Path, you can achieve nirvana, where you relinquish all desire and you sort of free yourself from samsara, which is the sort of endless cycle of death and rebirth, right? But if you're on that cycle of death and rebirth, and you have lived a life of desire, that might get you some bad karma, and you might end up not being reincarnated. You might end up as a hungry ghost. You're hungry in the sense that you desire. You still desire. It's like you desire something, and you can't. You can never satisfy that desire, right? So even in death, it's like you're hungry and you want to fulfill these desires that are really bad karma, right? Kind of also reminds me of, and I completely get it if no one understands this reference, but I mention it because we have the Rings of Power show coming out on Amazon in a little bit, you know, Tolkien, and I love me some Tolkien. And in the Silmarillion, which is kind of like the mythological backdrop to Tolkien's entire literary universe, you have the creature of darkness, Ungoliant, who looks like a giant spider. And anyway, she just eats everything, gobbles up the light, jewels, gold, light. Just always wants more, and grows bigger and hungrier, and is just never satisfied. And it ends up with this whole thing where the Dark Lord Morgoth makes a deal with her, and she saps the two trees of their light. And then she wants the Silmarils that were made by Fëanor, the greatest craftsman of the elves. My goodness, I'm a nerd. It's this whole cool thing that Tolkien does with desire that's still there in the stories that you may be more familiar with, like Gollum's desire for the ring in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, right? So that's what that reminds me of. Anyway, getting away from fantasy literature and folklore and back to ghosts, one other thing that's cool about this word is similarly to when we looked at the uncanny and its semantic equivalent in German, unheimlich, here we have an interesting bit of etymology that we can do between ghost and Geist. Geist is the German word for ghost, but it also can mean mind or spirit, right? So, for example, you may have heard the term Zeitgeist. So Zeitgeist means spirit of the times. Translated literally, it means time ghost or time spirit, but what it means is the spirit of the times, right? So does something fit with the spirit of the times, the Zeitgeist? So that's interesting. Ghost, Geist. It's funny, German has a lot of words like this that can mean more than one thing in interesting ways. And English has lost a lot of this because it's mixed with a lot of other languages. But Anyway, I mentioned in a previous lecture that some materialist philosophers have criticized Cartesian dualism. Here we have Gilbert Ryle, Daniel Dennett's doctoral supervisor, if I'm not mistaken, at Oxford, and he remarked very famously that there is no ghost in the machine. What he meant by that was that Descartes was wrong about his dualistic worldview. Sure, there is a machine, the human body, and arguably the brain is a type of natural machine, but there is no ghost in the machine means that there is no immaterial soul controlling everything. And Dennett has taken this up, of course, in his own work. A lot of Dennett's work is directed at, I suppose, the problematic assumptions about the mind that Cartesian philosophy has left us with. If you want to know more about that, it's best to go and read some of Dennett's own work. But anyway, these questions, these questions are interesting for a couple of reasons. They're not just interesting to people who claim to believe in them and who want to go ghost hunting or to discover evidence of life after death or something. But beyond that, whether you believe in any of this stuff tells you something about your metaphysical outlook. These paranormal researchers and parapsychologists who go ghost hunting or try to find evidence for life after death are probably not materialists, right? I mean, obviously. But if you deny the existence of ghosts, you're probably a materialist or a physicalist. Of course, if we were to find evidence, convincing evidence of the existence of ghosts, well, that would show that, well, perhaps there is life after death of a certain kind, and therefore that materialism is false. Naturalism is wrong. There's more than just the natural, there's the supernatural. I guess it could be possible that we also discover that something else entirely is going on. Again, I hate to get all nerdy with it, but again, it reminds me of the dualism you see in Star Trek or science fiction, like Star Trek, where, you know, there aren't ghosts, but, you know, you might have an episode where one of the characters becomes disembodied, and their mental energy, air quotes, very heavy air quotes, is floating around in space or something, and they have to figure out how to put you back into your body or something. Okay, like that's just dualism to me, but the way it's done in Star Trek, because it's sci-fi, is that, oh, there's some kind of scientific explanation. Really, it's never an explanation, it's just dualism, but still, if there were something like that really going on, like, oh, there's some kind of way that your mental energy, which isn't an immaterial soul, it would be some physical thing that could leave your body and survive death potentially, well, then ghosts would have to go from paranormal or supernatural to natural. We would have to try and understand you know, that in terms of naturalism. Again, maybe bring it back to Star Wars, where, you know, there's force ghosts, right? Obi-Wan Kenobi can appear to Luke Skywalker after he's died and tell him about the force. It's not magic, it's just the force, which is energy, and it's, you know, it's supposed to be sci-fi, right? So we can imagine maybe that's possible, but I doubt it. It smacks of dualism a little too much for me. Although, feel free to disagree if you wish. So there's lots of ways we can come at a discussion like this, right? Now that we've got some of the metaphysical discussion out of the way. We could talk about hauntings. We could talk about ghost hunting, which is searching for evidence of hauntings. And we will do this later. I want to wrap up with a sort of free-form discussion on this, actually. We could also talk about some of the strange phenomena, what I would call anomalous phenomena that are associated with ghosts or apparent ghost hauntings, haunted locations, and the like. Some of these include orbs, right? Orbs are captured on camera sometimes by ghost hunters, and what orbs really are light reflected off of particles floating around, motes of dust, possibly insects flying in the air, stuff like that. And the light simply reflects in a way that a camera, which is set up to catch as much light as possible in a dark room, captures it as an orb when we don't see anything. Right? We could talk about orbs. We could talk about any number of other weird phenomena. We could talk about the idea of a poltergeist. Poltergeist means noisy ghost. When you hear of stories of haunted houses where doors open and shut of their own accord, and there are strange noises and knockings and rappings, that's usually attributed to a poltergeist amongst believers in the supernatural. We will talk about this stuff a little bit toward the end, but what I want to do primarily is focus on the idea of communicating with the dead, communicating with spirits and ghosts and so forth. Mediumship, in other words, because this is really the thing that kicked off the spiritualism movement in the United States, which of course spread to Great Britain and mainland Europe. And that's how all of this psychical research got started. The Society for Psychical Research and other paranormal investigative societies got started because of claims of mediumship. So let's ask today if there is evidence that your soul, which whatever you think the soul is, let's say that for the purposes of our discussion today, that the soul is an immaterial entity that is essentially you. So it's you. It's your mind, your consciousness, all your memories, all your knowledge, you. Not your body, everything that is mental, that is you, that may or may not be immaterial. Can that survive death? And can it communicate with the living? Well, you probably know where I'm going with this, right? As Harry Houdini said, it's very easy to talk to the dead. It's getting the answers back that's the hard part. So, and Harry Houdini was, of course, a skeptic of this kind of thing, as many magicians are. And we're going to take a critical look at some of this stuff. Again, a lot of the stuff that we're starting off with is from the first part of chapter 21 in Blackmore. And we have covered some of it already, but let's go over some other stuff, and let's revisit some important points. So it all began in 1848 when Kate and Margaretta Fox, who were from Hydesville, New York, reported hearing raps coming from the end of their bed, a sort of knocking sound. And they claimed that they invented a sort of code, 2 taps for yes, 1 for no, or something like that. And they claimed that they were using this code to communicate with the spirit of a man who had died a number of years before and who was now buried underneath their house. Now, obviously, word spread very quickly about the sisters, and people began to visit them in Hydesville to see if the sisters could communicate with other spirits for them, and to see if some of the visitors could communicate with spirits as well. The Fox sisters also traveled around a little bit, giving public demonstrations of their ability to communicate with these raps, right? Now, obviously, some people were skeptical right from the get-go. They couldn't explain how the Fox sisters were accomplishing their illusions, though. But, some years after they had begun, quite a long time, actually, look, 40 years, the Fox sisters publicly confessed that they were frauds. They demonstrated that they produced the raps by cracking their toe joints against the bed. So you can imagine a sort of old-timey bed with a wooden frame and big bedposts, and beds used to have a lot more wood, and you could you know, in the same way that you crack your knuckles like this, they were just cracking their toes against the boards in their bed. By this time, the sisters were in financial ruin, and they were both suffering from problems related to alcoholism. And some people say that their confession might have been coerced because they were alcoholics. They had no money at this point. So the sisters later retracted their confession. Skeptics, however, considered the matter kind of over and done with. Like once a medium admits to fraud, the skeptics said, we should just say, okay, so if they faked this one case, or they showed us how they could fake many cases, we should just assume that it was all fake, right? The data set is contaminated, right? But believers in the Fox sisters, of course, continued on believing. And the story of the Fox sisters, as I mentioned, is the start of the spiritualist craze in the 19th century. A lot of interesting stuff was going on in the 19th century in America when it came to religion and spirituality, right? There was sort of in the early 19th century, probably just before the time of the Fox sisters began their purported efforts at mediumship. You know, there were new religious movements in the United States. If I'm not mistaken, in the early 19th century, this is when things like Christian Science and Mormonism got going as well, because there was a sort of spiritual, religious sort of, it was just a very busy, eclectic, crazy time, I guess, for religion, for folklore, for spiritualism. And one of the things that came out of that was mediumship and you know, belief in this kind of thing. So eventually, as we saw in some of the other papers we read, this kicked off psychical research. It was because of mediums like the Fox sisters that people like those who would go on to found the Society for Psychical Research in the United Kingdom, you know, they were inspired by the people who were inspired by the Fox sisters. And of course, the Society for Psychical Research led to parapsychology, which eschewed questions of life after death and ghosts. And we'll circle back and talk about why that was the case a little bit later on in the lecture. Let's see, what slide are we on here? 6. Okay. I want to make sure that we take a little break today. So keep a close eye on those slide numbers. So by the time we reached the end of the 19th century, that's when spiritualism was at its height. Spirit mediums could be found throughout Europe and the United States, and they would hold seances, right? And you're probably all familiar with the idea of a seance. A common one is the table turning seance, which we'll actually look at in a bit more detail in a little while. In a table turning seance, people would sit at a round table and place their hands on the table, and the table would move. And this is taken as evidence that a spirit is trying to communicate with the living via the spirit medium. Sometimes the medium would stand in a cupboard or a closet or something like that, and they would do their thing while inside this box, and they could do things like materialize extra limbs or you know, do stuff like this, you know, basically parlor magic. But often, whatever kind of seance you're talking about something that happens with a lot of people who already are arguably biased toward belief in ghosts, and these are happening in dark rooms. People reported all kinds of interesting things at these seances, right? Stuff that you still hear about if you check out like ghost hunting shows on television or on YouTube. People report that they've heard voices, or that they felt a chill, or that there's a touch, a tingling sensation, a cold breeze, or probably the creepiest one, seeing objects move without being touched, right? Some mediums would even claim to ooze a translucent substance called ectoplasm. You've probably heard of ectoplasm, right? If you've seen like Ghost Hunters or Ghostbusters, right? There's I actually haven't seen it. I missed that. Missed that one when I was growing up. But there's supposed to be some ectoplasm or something in there, right? That comes from these 19th century mediums. I was reading one account of a medium. I forget where I was reading it, but her ectoplasm, when analyzed by scientists, was found to be chewed up wads of paper, which is like gross, right? So there were definitely props being used here. Eusapia Palladino was one of these mediums, not the one who was chewing paper. But Eusapia Palladino was a spirit medium in the late 19th century who claimed to be able to do all kinds of things, like levitate herself or objects in the surrounding area. It was claimed she could materialize extra limbs, move furniture. So we're talking not just spirit mediums, talking to the dead, but also psychokinesis, claims of psychokinesis here. But she was caught cheating in 1895. And again, a lot of the skeptics were like, well, if she was cheating once, we have to assume she was cheating the other times as well. Why would someone who didn't need to cheat, right? Some psychical researchers at the time, though, thought that she generally could perform these acts under controlled conditions. There was one medium, Daniel Douglas Hume. It's a weird name. This looks like Douglas, but it's not. It's Douglas. And this is pronounced Hume, not Home. He was a Scottish person. So he was a Scottish medium. And the story goes that he never got caught cheating. He usually worked in well-lit rooms rather than dim rooms, too. It was said that he could handle hot coals and he wouldn't have burns. He could also do the extra limbs trick, levitate heavy objects, levitate himself. So psychokinesis. Now, Palladino was caught cheating. Hume was never caught cheating, apparently. But if there were mediums who wanted to, air quotes, enhance their act, well, there certainly were many, many tools available for them to do so at the time, right? At the time, right? So let's talk about magic for a bit, like magic, like not actual magic, but stage magic and that kind of thing. There's different sorts of scales at which magicians perform. One that you're obviously going to be familiar with is stage magic, right? And I would say that if you've ever watched a magic special on television, chances are there's a little stage magic happening there. If you've ever seen any of Chris Angel's stuff, it's basically stage magic on the street, which is why I kind of don't like it, because it's not actual street magic. It's kind of like cheating. But David Copperfield, Penn and Teller, Harry Houdini, the Amazing Randy, right? Stage magic on a stage, right? But you can also do close-up magic, right? David Blaine, right? I remember when that was a thing, and I'm watching David Blaine and he's doing like really simple card tricks. Like David Blaine, when he burst onto the scene in those street magic specials, the tricks he was doing was stuff that you could learn with a little practice. Like we're talking like ambitious card stuff. He did the 3-card Monty thing. I remember that was cool. The Balducci levitation, which you can do with just a pair of just a pair of shoes, just a pair of bulky shoes, right? And this is close-up magic. So that's magic that's supposed to be done right in front of your face, and it involves some skills. Oh, I think I know what that link is. Yeah.
Cheez-Its, yeah.
I think I've seen this, but yeah, if it is what I'm thinking of, yeah, you have to, like always looking at the camera. David Blaine was funny though, man. Like, I'm David Blaine. Watch closely. Like,
And he would do extreme things too, like hold his breath for forever underwater.
Yeah, which is not,
yeah,
which is not magic, but still, it's like, it reminds me of like Yench when he's talking about like fakirs who would like eat glass or swallow swords or breathe fire. It's kind of like that, where I'm like, it's not magic, but holy crap, that guy stood in a block of ice for 3 days or something, or like, wow, okay, that's all right, wow, like it's a spectacle. Even if it's not magic, it is a spectacle. So yeah, David Blaine's cool. And then of course there's Parlor Magicians. Now Parlor Magicians are like, I guess we don't really have them anymore. I guess the closest thing would be like you get your magician to come to like your kid's birthday party or something, would be like parlor magic. But parlor magic is in between stage magic and close-up magic. And it's the kind of magic show that you would do in the 19th century in a dimly lit room, exactly the same kinds of environments that spirit mediums were working in. And there were a lot of props available for this kinds of things. You had muslin drapes, trumpets, luminous paint, so they could paint objects so that they would glow in the dark. This was kind of a newfangled thing back then, and a lot of people, it was like a specialty item. Nowadays, I can go buy some glow in the dark paint or glow in the dark stickers from the dollar store, but back in the day, you had to know a magician to get some glow in the dark paint, right? You had to know a guy. Lots of different spirit writing slates are a great one that are still used by magicians of all kinds. Oh yes, yeah, Penn and Teller Fool Us. I love that. That's a great show. Yeah, thanks, Jenna. Yeah, that's a fantastic show. And some of the people that fool them, wow, like their magic is good. Their tricks, like these guys work on like one move for like 10,000 hours. It's nuts. Spirit writing slates. You've probably seen these where I show you like 2 chalkboards and they're blank on both sides. And then I put them together and there's a message, I could even show you how this works with a little piece of paper. Let's try and do a spirit writing slate. See if I remember my magic tricks. We're just gonna fold a little piece of paper. See what they're saying in the chat. Not quite. I'll show you. Okay, so let's see. We need to draw. Now, typically what a magician will do, let's see if I can get this right. What a magician will do is show you the slate is blank. So I have to get the angles right. The slate is blank. So I'll show you the slate. It's blank on this side. And if I turn it over, it's blank on this side. But if I put it back up, it's blank on this side. But if I just put my hands like this, and I think I hear, oh, someone's trying to get through a message, right? And of course, that's just a stupid trick. It all depends on the way. Yeah, see, it's terrible, right? Like, I didn't even do it very well. You're just showing the same side of the paper every time, right? So the idea is I want to show you the slate like this, and I want to get it back down here where it looks like I've turned it over, but really I'm just showing you the same side, right? It looks like I've turned it over, but I haven't, right? And this guy was on the other side the whole time, right? That's how spirit writing slates work. I haven't done that in forever, so I'm very terrible at it, but that's how that works. And often they'll do 2 of these slates because more slates equals more misdirection. And one of the slates will have the message already written on it, and they're showing you this slate's blank, and this slate's blank. Look, oh, they're blank. Put them together. Oh, a message, right? That's spirit writing slates. Ouija boards are a little different than that. We'll talk about Ouija boards though, because Ouija boards are a great example of the Idiomotor Effect, which is a big factor in this kind of thing. Now, okay, we may not know the exact extent to which many of these 19th century spirit mediums use these techniques, or to what extent, but I think it's not really that outlandish to claim that most of them were probably using these kinds of gaffes, right? That's what a magician would call them. If you have like a trick something, a trick deck of cards or a trick hat, that's your gaff. Skeptics, of course, claim, as I mentioned, that if any medium is caught cheating, we should assume they were always cheating. Maybe that's a little extreme for some folks who are kind of sitting on the fence about this, about belief in this stuff. But you know, if you're a scientist, right, and you publish a paper, and then it's found that you faked some of your data, well, the whole paper is retracted. They don't just go in and take out the data points that you made up. No, they retract the paper, right? So, I mean, does anyone know about Dr. Andrew Wakefield? So you guys know about the conspiracy theory that vaccines cause autism? So this was that was the guy. Probably someone said that. Yes. Okay. So a few people know. So yeah, so he faked his data, and it's not like they just, took the fake stuff out. Yeah. Daniel's right. Yeah. He lost his medical license, and the Lancet retracted the paper, and, he can't practice medicine anymore for good reason. He made stuff up. So that's the kind of standard we hold people to in science. Medical science, natural science, standards have to be high, right? And it's not like we just, assume everybody's cheating and everybody's making stuff up. But if that's what happens, there have to be consequences, because look at the consequences. I remember long time ago, there were barely any anti-vaxxers. And then COVID happened. And now look how many anti-vaxxers there are, because of this little seed of misinformation that spread online, right? So same with this stuff. If you want us to scientifically evaluate it, cool, like, I'm down. If someone says to me, I have psychic powers, I will be the first one to say, come on into the lab. I got some Zener cards right here. Let's do this. I will 100% take you up on that. But if I catch you cheating, I kind of have to assume that, like, cheating is what you've been doing, right? So, that's why skeptics are so strict about this kind of thing. Why would mediums want to enhance their act anyway? If you really had the ability to communicate with the dead, why would you need to enhance it, right? Some say that even the best mediums have to enhance their efforts from time to time. But do you accept this argument when it comes to anything else? Right? Like, Lance Armstrong was obviously one of the greatest cyclists ever. So it was fine if he enhanced his abilities a little bit with steroids, right? I mean, that's fine, right? Like, no one accepts that. Yeah, like, what if you were like what if you were like one of the best chess players? What if you were like Magnus Carlsen, right? And you're playing chess. And what if I'm not saying Magnus Carlsen is not on Adderall, but imagine you get controversy. Chess world champion uses Adderall to enhance chess abilities or something, right? You wouldn't say like, oh, it's probably fine. It's Magnus Carlsen, he just needed a little boost, and it's like, come on, like we don't accept this. We don't accept this line of thinking for other things. Why should we accept it for mediums? After all, if mediumship were real, that would be enormously consequential, not just for science, but for people. If we really could communicate with the spirits of the deceased, just think of how that would change our existence. Of course, in the 19th century, there were some interesting tools that mediums could use to enhance their abilities, the same tools that parlor magicians would use. Modern technology allows mediums to go even further. Now, I've got a clip here that you can watch on the break, or I'll post it to Discord after class. This is Peter Popoff, and he's a faith healer, not a medium. But he, and I think I talked about this case in the first lecture. Peter Popoff was caught using a technique called hot reading by James Randi. This is talked about in the PBS documentary Secrets of the Psychics. That's what this is a clip from that. Hot reading is when you gather information beforehand and you use your foreknowledge that you've gathered to create the illusion of some kind of psychic or supernatural powers. Popoff was doing this because, or how he was doing this was that before he would do a service, he would have the audience fill out prayer cards with the name, what they were suffering from, and what they wanted, all that stuff. And his wife was covertly feeding him this information from these prayer cards through his wireless earpiece. And Randy and his team picked up the signals using just I think it was a radio receiver. Like, it was so simple to catch him. And, you might think, well, what's the harm? I mean, Popoff was not just saying like doing the laying on of hands and saying, okay, now your athlete's foot is cured or something. No, he's got people on medication that they need to live, throwing their medication up on stage, throwing their medication away because they think they've been healed. Like, he's got diabetics throwing insulin. He's got cancer patients throwing their medication away. People with mental illness, I don't need these antidepressants anymore, throw them away, right? He's got people doing this, and that's freaking dangerous, right? Nowadays, Popoff is, I think after this, he declared bankruptcy. Now he's back selling like magic water. So, if you see any water at the Popoff name, don't, right? He's a con artist. Like, he's been shown to be a con artist. I know there's people, the religious people out there who are, acting in good faith, and they're generally good people. Peter Popoff is not one of those people. So he was using hot reading. You can also use cold reading, and that's when you gather information as you're doing the reading, right? The subject, and using that information to create the illusion of psychic powers. Let's see what's in the chat here. Oh, a free sample. Well, okay, maybe everybody should just get a free sample, and then we'll get all his free samples. But it's probably one of those things like where you have to put your credit card information first, and it's like, here's your free sample, and then they just keep you on their list and start charging you like, here's your monthly magic water. Right? Like, oh yeah. So cold reading. This is something that psychics do. Psychics. But mediums can also employ this technique. Yeah. Like it's it's probably from just like from their tap or something, like but yeah, okay, so and this is something that a lot of modern day television psychics, they'll say, I'm a psychic medium. They're not really one or the other. They claim to be both. So you're talking like Long Island medium, I don't know her name, Teresa Caputo, I think, Sylvia Brown, Rosemary Altea, John Edward, James Van Prague. These are the people you're likely to have heard of if you've heard of them, and they'll go by under the moniker of psychic mediums. And they'll use hot reading and cold reading. And in a cold reading session, what is happening is that the psychic is actually soliciting information from the person getting the reading, and that person is giving that information up without realizing that they're giving it up, and then it's fed back to them bit by bit by the psychic to give the illusion that the psychic is getting this knowledge from the spirit realm as opposed to having been told. And there's all kinds of interesting reasons why this works that have to do with human psychology. But yeah, that's cold reading. It's a trick of psychics and mediums and magicians, frankly. Mentalists use both of these to create the illusion of supernatural powers, when in fact they're just using magic tricks. Right. So maybe not all mediums are cheating, but there is a lot of fraud out there. So there's good reason to suspect that mediums are cheating. Also, people can just be wrong, right? People can misinterpret what they see. In a dark room, right? In a dark seance room, that's the perfect place for illusions to happen. Or if maybe you're even a little bit pathological, hallucinations and stuff like that can happen. Now there's this interesting Richard Wiseman, a skeptical parapsychologist. So he's a parapsychologist, but he's a skeptical one. Recreated these conditions in his fake seances. So here in the fake seance, there's always an experimental confederate or a plant, right? An actor. And they would claim the table was levitating, when in fact the table was not levitating at all. They would have objects painted with glow-in-the-dark paint, and they were placed around the room. And there was another assistant who was just hiding in the dark with a long stick, poking these objects so that they would move or fall off of a shelf, so that people think that maybe there's a ghost. A ghost just knocked that vase over. Well, no, it was the guy hiding in the shadows with a stick. So he had like several confederates. He had people behind the scenes creating these weird goings on, and an actor who would make claims like, oh, the table's levitating. And 1/3 of the participants reported the table had moved in one of these experiments, even though the table hadn't moved. And out of those who reported the table moving, obviously, I think somewhat unsurprisingly, More were believers in the paranormal compared to disbelievers in the paranormal. So there's a sort of susceptibility, I think, to believing that the table moved because somebody said the table moved, simply because you already believe that it's possible for a spirit to cause the table to move, right? And we'll look at another case of this kind of thing in a moment that involves Michael Faraday. So that'll be cool. Let's just talk a little bit more about let's do this slide, and then we're at 3:34. So maybe we'll want to think about taking a quick break. So we'll do this slide and then we'll take a little break. Now, remember, the height of spiritualism, the end of the 19th century, that's the Victorian era. A lot of scientists of the day were ardent materialists. Physics had blown up since Newton. Some people around this time thought physics was over, right? We figured it all out. We just figured out electromagnetism, for goodness sake, in the late 19th century. James Clerk Maxwell. Michael Faraday was showing me his electricity. I came up with the formulas, because Faraday didn't know the math. Faraday was very much self-taught. He actually came from a very poor background and could not afford an education. So Faraday was a brilliant scientist, a brilliant chemist. He just could not do the math that was necessary to formalize the laws of electricity and magnetism. James Clerk Maxwell did that, but he couldn't have done it without Faraday. But anyway, so at the time we've got chemistry. We know a lot of stuff. We know about all kinds of elements. We're way past alchemy now. Yes, that's right. That I'll talk. Let's talk about Newton in a moment. But at the end of the 19th century, alchemy was done. It was all chemistry. Physics was pretty much over as far as everyone was concerned. It wasn't until Einstein that people realized, like, oh, physics is not over. We got relativity, and then later on we got quantum mechanics. So physics is not over. But in the 19th century, it was like, look at all our math, our physics, like, we got this. We know how the world works. See, Newton came a little bit before this, when alchemy and chemistry were still not completely divorced from one another, and Newton was an alchemist. Some speculate he may have even suffered from mercury poisoning, owing to his alchemical experiments, because he was a very peculiar guy. Like, he would go and lecture to empty rooms sometimes. If no students showed up, he would still deliver the lecture. So Newton was interesting. We don't really know what his deal was, but yeah, he was interesting. So Newton, along with Leibniz, they kind of independently invented or discovered, depending on what you think math is, independently invented or discovered calculus. But yeah, Newton was also a kind of a mystic. So very, very strange. But yeah, when we get to the Victorian era, that's largely gone away. So a lot of Victorian scientists are ardent materialists. But, as we've seen, a few scientists took claims of mediums seriously. So the chemist Sir William Crooks, this guy was a badass chemist. I mean, William Crooks discovered thallium, and he was a key figure in spectroscopy, developing spectroscopy. So spectroscopy is like how we can tell what things are made of by the light that reflects off or is absorbed. This is how we can look at stars, far away, and we can see, oh, this star is made of mostly hydrogen with some helium and some argon and some oxygen and some other stuff. Or this nebula has these kinds of gases in it, because everything that's made of stuff reflects certain wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation and absorbs certain wavelengths of it. It's like a fingerprint of what something is made of from light. And this wouldn't be possible without William Crooks's work. So he was like a really good scientist. But there's some speculation that maybe because of the death of his brother, he got interested in this mediumship stuff. He claimed to have taken photographs of spirits, and he was certainly duped by the spirit photographer whose Wikipedia page I shared on the Discord server last night. I can't remember his name now. It's gone. But you know, this was in a day when photography was also quite new, I mean, comparatively speaking. Nowadays, we can look at a photo on the internet and, you know, if it's been photoshopped, we can kind of like, you get a funny feeling when it comes to Photoshop photos, right? But nobody knew what a fake photograph looked like back then because photography was so new. And this guy faked a portrait of Crooks's wife, a spirit portrait of Crooks's wife, which convinced Crooks. William Hope. Yeah, that's the guy. Yeah, couldn't remember his name. So he was using the late 19th century equivalent of Photoshop, right? Which is basically, you know, manipulating the way the film develops and using multiple exposures. And, you know, it was all done in camera and in the dark room, of course, because there were no computers, but very much the same thing. Nowadays, I think the analogous thing that we deal with now would be deep fakes, right? It can be hard to spot them. There are some good deep fakes out there. There are some that are, you know, meant to be silly and are obviously fake, but there are other deep fakes that will claim to show like, oh, this political figure said this kind of thing, and it's very convincing because you have this like what looks like a live video of someone saying something. So that's kind of like deep fakes to us would be like fake photographs in the late 19th century. So we, you know, if you think of it that way, I don't maybe it's not that surprising that Crooks was fooled. He already was sympathetic to claims of life after death, and he wasn't a photographer. He was an excellent chemist, but why should we assume that his knowledge of chemistry generalizes to photography? There's no reason to assume that, right? He was also convinced of Daniel Douglas Hume's powers, and that his powers implied the existence of some kind of energy that was unknown to science. And you know, this is what supernormal or paranormal meant back then. Something that was natural, but as yet unexplained. So what was the motivation for thinkers like Crooks? Blackmore thinks it's probably antagonism toward physicalism, right? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, physics in the 19th century was just so successful. But it was completely deterministic. It left no room for God or free will or the soul, no prospects for life after death. It kind of took away our special place, you know, in the universe, which science has been doing since the scientific revolution, right? We used to think we were the center of the universe, but Copernicus came along and argued, no, the Earth revolves around the sun. And Galileo came along and said, look, there's other things that orbit other planets that they don't even orbit the sun. You know, the moon orbits us. Jupiter has, I can see these 4 big moons that Jupiter has, and they don't orbit the sun, they orbit Jupiter. So, you can, you know, kind of make the comparison here with Laplace's demon. Laplace, the famous French mathematician, he had written a book on physics, and none other than Napoleon Bonaparte asked him, where's God in your book? You don't have God in your physics textbook. And he said, I had no need of that hypothesis. So there's Laplace. He's a kind of determinist, materialist, atheist, And Laplace's demon is you know, a thought experiment on determinism, right? Imagine there's a supremely powerful being like God or a demon who knows all of the conditions of the universe at any one time. They would be able to tell you exactly what you'd be doing a week from today, or 20 years down the road, because everything is deterministic. Everything is rigid causality, right? A causes B, which causes C, which causes D, right? So check out that thought experiment if you want to get an idea, the picture of the world that 19th century physics presented. Of course, physics wasn't the only science that was upsetting our sort of privileged understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe. This was also the time of Darwin and his publication of The Origin of Species, which of course argued that new species are not created, they evolve from other life forms. And we are no exception to that. So we were not created. Along comes Darwin and says, we're not created as we are, like this. We were not created and placed in some Garden of Eden. We evolved from lower animals, apes. And of course, we know this is true. We have so much evidence for evolution that at this point, it may as well be as airtight as physics, as far as most biologists are concerned. So this is some very materialistic stuff going on in the late 19th century, right? In the early 19th century, we had spiritualism, we had a lot of religious revival movements in the United States. So you get stuff like Christian Science and Mormonism and a lot of new kind of religious movements like that. And all of it comes to a head in the late 19th century, where you have very materialistic science that's kind of rendering it impossible for a lot of people to believe in a lot of things they used to believe, like souls or God or life after death, or that we are special. What did Nietzsche say? What's the most famous quote that comes to mind from Friedrich Nietzsche, the German romantic philosopher? It's from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The madman comes down from the mountain. Yes, God is dead and we have killed him. This is what Nietzsche was talking about. It's just not possible to believe in God. God is dead and we have killed him means that we've figured out that this is just not how the world works. The possibility for believing in God is no longer a real possibility. Yeah, God is dead and we have killed him. How will we, the murderers of all murderers, wash the blood from our hands? That it goes something like that. So it's the parable of the madman from Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Yeah. This is kind of like this is exactly what Nietzsche was talking about. So Nietzsche thought you could do a couple of things here. You could just say, well, whatever, I'm going to believe anyway. That would mean you are one of the last men. Or you can try and be the Übermensch, the superior human, and you can try and come up with your own values and your own purpose in life. And this is why Nietzsche is sometimes counted as an existentialist. He's not really, but he certainly influenced them. I don't think he's really an existentialist, though. Anyway, that's way beyond the scope of this class. So a lot of people who Nietzsche would have called the last men, right? They believed that maybe spiritualism provides evidence of life after death, and maybe we don't have to get rid of all of that stuff like souls and morality and the fact that we're special, because spiritualism provides an alternative to materialism. But as we're going to see in a moment, Michael Faraday, the chemist and physicist, and a very, very thoroughgoing skeptic, realized the implications for science would be incredible if it turned out that spiritualism was true. And so he sought to tackle this mystery with a little bit of experimentation. Now, it's 3:48, and I don't know how long this is going to go. So why don't we take like a 10-minute break, 10, 12 minutes. So let's try and be back for 4. If you have not already watched the video on ghost hunting that I posted to the Discord server, feel free to watch it now. It's only 10 minutes long. Just check it out because we'll need to watch it for our discussion. And so we'll be back for 4. I'm just going to stop sharing and stop recording for now, and then we'll just pick it up again at 4. And if people want to hang out in the chat, then feel free to do so. So I'll just pause recording and we'll be back in a moment. All right. Back from break. Let's just wait to see. Oh, good. Most people are still here. Awesome. So let's share the screen again and pick up where we left off. Perfect. Whoop. Really? I mean, okay, well, let's talk about the video toward the end. Okay, so actually a few of the mannequins and that weird dog thing, those were weird looking. Basements. I mean, there's a lot of interesting psychology at play here, so this should be fun to talk about later on. But yeah, there was another video that I almost shared, but it was ultimately, I decided it was too silly. So it was from the show Ghost Hunters on A&E, which features TAPS, the whatever paranormal society. They're the guys who are plumbers. They're plumbers by day, paranormal investigators by night. I'm not kidding. And not that plumbers are dumb. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that because you are an expert plumber does not make you an expert on matters paranormal. Anyway, they go to this place where there's this ghost that likes to this is what they claim, I'm not making this up, this ghost likes to pull women's hair and pinch their butts. And I was like, I could share this one, but it was just so silly. But watch it after if you want. It was so dumb. The ghost hunters go into the basement. It's always a basement. Nothing happens. So the men say, maybe we should go. So they leave the women with this lecherous ghost. And of course, nothing happens. No one gets their hair pulled or their bum pinched. But, it's the usual, oh, I felt a tingling or I felt a cold thing. And it's like, well, okay. But it was just like, what a silly premise. This ghost pinches people's butts. Like, how does that work if ghosts are non-physical? Like, ghosts are non-physical, butts are physical. You have a mind-body interaction problem there still. So I'm just saying. But let's look at what Michael Faraday did about seances. So here is a picture of a table turning seance from back in the day. This would be the medium here, I assume, because she has this like really metal eye makeup on. So I think that's our medium. And this is a table turning seance. So we've got a round table and we got everybody's hands on the table. And what happens during one of these seances is the table moves, as if a ghost is trying to communicate by moving the table. And people sitting around here, they claim that they are not moving the table. And indeed, they don't have the experience of willing their arms to move in order to move the table. So what was going on here? Faraday suspected something was amiss. So he came up with a very clever way of investigating what was going on. Remember that, science, the first step in science is to observe. So Faraday observed that the table was moving, and then he had to test a hypothesis. really there are like two hypotheses here at play. Either the table is moving or the table is being moved by people's hands. So Faraday devised this type of glue, this kind of like a rubber cement sort of glue, I imagine. And he placed this on these cards, which could be fixed to the table, and the people doing the seance would put their hands on the cards. So the cards would be underneath where their hands would be on the table. And Faraday could tell by looking at the cement after the seance, judging by the patterns and the, you know, what he saw, he could tell whether the person's hands had moved first or whether the table had moved first. And unsurprisingly, what he found was that the people's hands were moving the table, yet they were not moving the table consciously, you know. So that was very curious. Psychologists call this the idiomotor effect, when you are moving without conscious awareness that you are the source of that movement. The idiomotor effect is at play in a lot of paranormal phenomena. It's obviously a key contributing factor to the tables moving in these seances. When they do move, remember, in those fake seances we discussed earlier, we can get people to believe the table moved just by having someone say, I felt the table move, even though the table didn't move. But when the table does move, it's the idiomotor effect. The idiomotor effect also plays a role in claims of dowsing. Who knows what dowsing is? So have you ever seen somebody holding two L-shaped rods in their hands, or using a Y-shaped stick? It's called a witching stick.
Yeah, the Y shape I've seen. Definitely.
Yeah. Sometimes people do it with a pendulum, and the pendulum will swing a certain way. So these are all dowsing techniques. Yeah, exactly. Daniel and Jenna, exactly. The most common practice is trying to find water with a stick. I know how that sounds, but people believe this. But that's the idea. What's probably going on there is the idiomotor effect. And of course, the number one idiomotor affected paranormal activity would be using a Ouija board, as we'll get to in a moment. So what Faraday found is explained by the idiomotor effect. They were moving the table, but they weren't aware that they were doing that, right? And that's a real thing that can happen. And we'll talk about why and how that works throughout the remainder of the lecture. But you know, even after Faraday debunked table turning seances, supernatural phenomena continued to be espoused. After Faraday, it was Harry Houdini. After Houdini, it was James Randi. Nowadays, you've got Darren Brown, Penn and Teller, those sorts of people calling the BS when they see it, right? But nonetheless, these supernatural phenomena continue to be espoused. There are still psychic mediums on television, and with social media, especially like YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, there's almost another resurgence of this stuff going on. Nowadays, it's from what I've seen, there's a lot of stuff about like weird time travel stuff or reality shifting and that kind of thing. And that's why I want to devote a lecture to it this term. But a lot of this stuff spreads so easily on social media. There's even, I don't know his name. What's his name? He's a new one. He's a celebrity psychic. He's a young fella. I think he's probably a little bit younger than I am. I don't know his name. Anyway, he claims that he doesn't use Google. A celebrity psychic. A psychic for celebrities, right? Celebrities are people that are famous and who people know a lot of stuff about and who have a lot of their information available on the internet. And we have a celebrity psychic, and he claims not to use Google. Okay. So what does he use?
Rebecca says Tyler Henry.
I bet that could be him. That could be him. But he says he doesn't use Google. I'm like, okay. Does he use DuckDuckGo?
Or Bing.
Yeah, or Bing. Maybe he uses Ask Jeeves. Maybe that's still a thing. I don't know. Yeah, Netflix. Yeah. So, I mean, remember, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If a guy comes to me and says, I'm a psychic, but I only do it for celebrities, and I don't use Google. Okay. I don't have to believe you, though. Like, you know, Sagan said, you know, the extraordinary claims thing. Christopher Hitchens had another saying. What can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And this is one of those cases, I think. You know, it's just so... It just strains credulity. I mean, and this goes for some of the ghost hunting stuff that we'll talk about in a moment. In this day and age, it should just be. I mean, I understand that people have their beliefs about life after death, but in this day and age, the claim that I'm a psychic, I promise I don't use Google, anyone who makes that claim should be laughed out of the room. It's just, I'm sorry. Like, I don't care if you believe in life after death, fine, but that's just so, yeah. So I'm going to have to watch his Netflix thing and see what he's up to. See if I can catch some of that cold reading and hot reading going on. So anyway, we don't really do a whole lot of seances anymore, but what we do have are Ouija boards, right? Here's a Ouija board. And they look pretty creepy. They look very Victorian to me. Victorian stuff looks creepy and weird, which is why I like it. You know, like old Victorian photographs. Sometimes those would be dead people. You know, in the early days of photography, when someone died, then you would dress them up, make them up, sit them up in a chair, and you'd get photographs of them. Which is one reason why those are so creepy. A lot of haunted houses are Victorian style houses because they became abandoned and derelict during the Great Depression. And so those were the houses we started using in movies, you know, like the Bates house in Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock is an old Victorian style house. And so you got Norman Bates up there, you know, being weird and thinking that he's his mom or something. So Victorian stuff is creepy, and this looks kind of Victorian. It's used to contact the spirits of the deceased. The name comes from yes in French and yes in German, oui and ja. So Ouija, the Ouija board. Some of the mispronunciations you see of this online are really hilarious, though. You know, like how do you use a Luigi board or something like this? It's great. Some of that may be due to autocorrect, though. So when we use a Ouija board, what are we doing? Are we talking to spirits, or is there something else going on? Yeah, yeah, Ouija board, Luigi board. There's so many, but it's Ouija board, and that's how you can remember oui and ja. Two simple words. They both mean yes. It turns out that there's a simple explanation for what's going on with a Ouija board, and that is the earlier mentioned Idiomotor Effect. How did researchers figure this out? Well, this is why we decided to have you read this chapter from Blackmore on freedom of the will, because free will, our sense that we have it, is very much a thing that we experience subjectively. Like the experience of consciously willing something to happen is a subjective experience that we can have if the conditions are right, even if we haven't actually willed anything. And it can also happen the opposite way, where we can do something and feel like we're not doing it, like in the Idiomotor Effect. One case that illustrates this very interestingly is precognitive arousal. Precognitive arousal was researched by William Gray Walter. He was a neurologist, and he also was like a hobbyist with some of the earliest robots. He built robots called tortoises that actually worked very much like today's Roomba vacuum cleaners, using the behavior-based robotics approach from Rodney Brooks. So anyway, he had tested patients who had these electrodes implanted in their motor cortex. So these are patients who were coming in for brain surgery, right? Because you can't do these kinds of experiments otherwise. You know, it's just too risky to say, come on into the lab, I'll do brain surgery just to do an experiment by putting some electrodes in your brain. We can't do that. Yeah. Well, let's come back to that. But you're right, Andrea. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Professor Davies is absolutely correct. I don't know, about 40%. It's I want to go even higher with that number actually, but we'll come back to that. But yeah, Jim is not wrong. So we have these patients who are coming in. They got to have some brain surgery anyway. A lot of brain surgery back in this time period would have been for epilepsy. So people have epileptic seizures, and we find the eptilogenic bits of the cortex, the source of the seizures, and we take them out. So that was quite common. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jim does Mysteries of the Mind. I think that class is like his baby. It's his like big sort of thing that attracts. It's very big class from what I understand. And he talks about all kinds of stuff, like really interesting stuff. So okay. So they're going in for brain surgery, and they're like, hey, do you want to participate in an experiment? Sure, why not? I'll participate in an experiment, hook that electrode up. So this electrode is detecting signals from the motor cortex. Now the participant is sat in front of a projector, and they have to press a button whenever they want to change to the next slide. Now, unbeknownst to the participants, what's happening here is that the slide is not changing when the button is pressed. The slide is changing when there's sufficient activity in their motor cortex, which the electrode detects and then amplifies. And the patients had this weird experience where they were like, I was about to press this button, and then the slide changed on its own just before I was about to press the button, because of the signal that's detected from the electrode. So we know from William Gray Walter's work that under certain strange conditions, we can be in control of actions without feeling that we are. And that's exactly what happened here, because technically those patients were in control of that slide change, just not with the button press, but with their willing to press the button. Really crazy sci-fi stuff here. Maybe Blackmore speculates if Gray Walter had maybe had some different experimental conditions with, say, longer time between arousal, that is the activity in the motor cortex, and the button pressing, maybe the patients would have reported the button press did initiate the change, right? If they had just caused a bit more of a delay so that the signal only changed the slide when they actually pressed the button, they would have felt that they were actually pressing the button, even though it was not the button press that caused the slide to change. So it's very, very funky. Sometimes in cases of mental illness, we can have the sense that we are not in control of our own thoughts and actions. This is particularly true of schizophrenia. So some schizophrenic patients report that their actions aren't controlled by themselves. The source could be aliens or demons, or it could even be other people that they know. And sometimes they even report that thoughts aren't their own, but the thoughts have been inserted into their minds by the same nefarious forces, aliens, demons, other people who mean them harm. And of course, schizophrenics report that this is deeply disturbing. And I I certainly cannot imagine what that must be like. But I other than that, it must be quite disturbing to have a thought. Imagine having a thought and feeling like that thought didn't come from your own mind. I can understand that there might be mental conditions under which that is possible, but imagining what it's like is very difficult for me. Because, you know, I'm thinking my thoughts, right? Like, aren't I? Well, maybe I'm not, because I don't actually think that there is an I in there. I'm not a realist about the self, but that's a whole other can of worms. Dan knew a guy secondhand who was convinced that people were projecting their thoughts into his head. Okay, yeah. So I wonder if maybe there was some kind of schizotypal things going on with that person. It sounds like maybe there could be. One thing that's not in my slides, but that's very interesting, is alien hand syndrome and anarchic hand syndrome. And if you ever have a chance to take a class on consciousness with Myrto Myopoulos at Carleton, you should do it, because she talks about this a lot in her discussions of consciousness and agency and this kind of thing. And it's very interesting. And Blackmore discusses it. Certain lesions in the brain can cause alien hand syndrome, which is a syndrome where one hand kind of behaves as if it's got a mind of its own. It does things that I'm not aware of, perhaps. And I'm not willing my hand. I don't have it, but like if I did, you know, maybe this hand is like my lecture hand and it helps me talk. This hand could be overdoing something else, like taking my bachelor's degree off the wall or something, and I'd have no knowledge of it. I wouldn't be aware of it. My hand would have a mind of its own. Anarchic hand syndrome is similar, but not exactly the same. Anarchic hand syndrome is when your anarchic hand kind of undoes everything that your regular hand is doing. So people with anarchic hand syndrome, you know, they'll be like buttoning their shirt, and then their anarchic hand, after they're done buttoning their shirt, their anarchic hand will come and unbutton the shirt, right? So, and these folks must also feel very strange, because imagine your hand not behaving the way you tell it to, or not tell it, but the way you will it to, and your hand doesn't do that. Your hand's got a mind of its own. That's got to be so freaking weird. So these are all examples of the way that, you know, the experience of will, of freedom of the will, can break down. Can it happen, you know, this way? Can it happen where our brains create the feeling we've caused an action even when we haven't? Yes, it can. Our brains do this all the time. Daniel Wegner, who passed away a little while ago, he was a psychologist at Harvard University, and his specialty was free will. And he called the experience of free will the mind's best trick. What happens when the mind plays a trick on us that we have free will? Well, this trick doesn't, it's important to note, this trick does not just happen, you know, in weird cases like precognitive arousal, where, you know, maybe I think my button press changed a slide, but actually it was signals from my motor cortex, right? It's not just in weird cases like this, it's all the time. It's all the time. The mind is playing this trick on us all the time. Free will is an illusion, according to Wegner, right? So he proposes that this illusion happens in 3 stages. We need 3 things to happen to experience conscious will. The brain has to plan actions, and it has to prepare to carry them out. Then we have to become aware of thinking about performing the action. That's called your intention. So, and by the way, if you read earlier in the chapter, if you read about Benjamin Liebey's studies on the readiness potential, you know that the brain plans actions, and this happens about 300 milliseconds before we consciously intend to act. Now that's spooky. Whether that means we don't have free will, that's up to you. I like what Richard Gregory says. Psychologist Richard Gregory says, We don't have free will, but we do have free won't. So my brain is doing a lot of this stuff automatically. That's why when it said that Jim Davies said, oh, 40% could be unconscious habits and stuff, I think it's maybe even more than that, because my brain is always coming up with things it can do. So is yours. That's how your brain works. Who says? Andrea. Oh, yeah. You know, this is a book that I have to admit that I've heard a lot about, but I haven't read yet. But Oliver Sacks was a very good neurologist. Yeah. Phantom limb syndrome, amnesia. Yeah. I've got to read this, and so should all of you, because it's about very strange neurological cases. Yeah, he talks about all kinds of stuff. I think he's even got a chapter on savant syndrome in there, and I think savant syndrome is just utterly fascinating. So anyway, so your brain is always coming up with things to do, right? So right now you can't see it, it's out of the screen, but I'm looking at my delicious can of sparkling water. And when I look at that can, you know what my brain's doing? My brain is automatically forming motor plans unconsciously for me to reach out and grab that can. It's inhibition that prevents me from doing that. If our brain didn't inhibit certain signals, we would automatically do all kinds of behaviors like reach for things, reach out and open doors, go and sit down. There are even certain neurological disorders of inhibition where people can't inhibit these automatic behaviors. So there was one case of a man who had suffered from a neurological disorder where I think he had to have brain surgery to remove the damaged areas of the brain, but he was left with this disorder of his inhibition and intentional control, such that as soon as he went to visit his doctor's apartment, and as soon as he saw the spare bedroom, he got undressed and climbed into bed. It was the middle of the freaking afternoon, right? So yeah, this is just how your brain works, but your brain inhibits it. Yeah. Well, the problem is, I mean, really, we do use 100% of our brain, and then the conscious mind seems to go, wait, we don't need to do all of this stuff, right? That's why Gregory says what he says. We do not have free will, but we have free won't. So I have all these intentions all the time that are unconsciously happening, but I can not carry them out, right? So if my brain does this, if my brain plans an action and prepares to carry it out, and my intention occurs close enough to the planning of the action, and finally, if the action follows my intention, then I will conclude that my intention caused the action. So let's try and make that a bit more concrete. I'm looking at my sparkling water, and my brain is unconsciously, it's getting, processing in the dorsal stream to the motor cortex from the visual area, forming motor plans in the premotor area, maybe get a readiness potential when I get ready to reach out. That's all done before I say, I'd sure like to take a sip of that and reach out. But if I reach out after my brain has planned that, and after I get the conscious intention and they occur close enough together, then it feels to me like I decided to reach out and pick up this can of sparkling water and have a sip. And this is what's not happening when we have cases of the idiomotor effect. All right. So there are 3 requirements for the experience of will to occur. The thought must occur before the action. The thought must be consistent with the action. The thought is the intention, that is. And it must not be accompanied by other causes. Now, Wegner and his colleague Talia Wheatley wanted to test this, so they conducted an experiment using a variation of the Ouija board. Instead of the pointer or planchette that you see in this picture, this is called the planchette. And the idea is that it doesn't really point, but that this circle goes over the thing. So this, you'd be able to read yes in the circle. You wouldn't point to it with the planchette. So the pointer or planchette is replaced by a 20-meter square board mounted on a computer mouse that could be moved around a tabletop. And the mouse was moving on a screen that displayed pictures of 50 small objects. And the experiment used 51 naive undergraduate participants. And unbeknownst to these participants, each was paired with a Confederate. So we're going to, even though there are 51 different participants, we're going to call the participant Dan. Now, just remember, there's more than one Dan here. There's like Dans, but we'll just use Dan singular for simplicity's sake. And the Confederate we'll call Jane. These are just the names Blackmore uses. So Dan and Jane are sitting facing one another, and they place their hands on the cursor board, which is on top of this computer mouse. They're asked to move the cursor over the objects. Like a Ouija board, right? You're moving your planchette over the board. Well, here you're moving your cursor, and you can see the mouse on the screen moving over these objects. Now, they were required to stop once every 30 seconds, and they had to rate how strong their intention was to make each stop. They were also playing words through headphones during the trial. These words matched what was on the screen. So for every item on the screen, there would be the corresponding word that you would eventually hear through the headphones. So they were playing words through the headphones. Then they'd play music for 10 seconds, indicating that they should come to a stop. Now, Dan, or all of the Dans, believe that Jane is receiving different words in her headphones. Actually, Jane is hearing instructions from the experimenter about the movements that she ought to make. So we got 4 different trials here where Jane was told to stop on an object, say a white swan, or just any swan really, while Dan is hearing the music. So Dan could hear the word swan. Remember, there's many Dans. So one of our Dans could hear the word swan either 30 seconds before, 5 seconds before, 1 second before, or 1 second after Jane is told to stop on the swan, depending on which condition we're in. In the other trials, there were no forced stops. Now, participants, all of our Dans, gave the highest agreement ratings for I intended to make the stop when the word came 1 or 5 seconds before the stop. And they'd be using Likert type scales for this. So do you know those scales, right? Like on a scale of 1 to 5, rate your agreement with this statement. That's a Likert scale. They gave their lowest rating when the stop occurred 30 seconds before or 1 second after Jane stops on the swan. So they're hearing these words. And so I'm Dan, I hear the word swan 1 second before the music plays, and then I have to stop. And if I'm near the swan, I'm going to want to stop on the swan. But if I hear it 30 seconds before or 1 second after, and we don't stop on the swan, I'm not going to feel like I willed that to happen. So Wegner and Wheatley call this the priority principle. Priority principle says that effects are experienced as willed when the relevant thoughts occur just before them. So the thought of a swan, and then I just happen to stop on a swan because that's what our experimental Confederate Jane does. Well, I'm going to get idiomotor affected and not feel like I stopped on the swan. If I heard it like 30 seconds before or something. But if I hear it very close to when we actually stop on the swan, it'll feel like I did that. Now, these results are very interesting because they show that the experience of will can be elicited even when you haven't actually exercised a voluntary choice. Because remember, even when Dan is reporting that I felt like stopping on the swan, it's still Jane being told to stop on the swan, right? And this could explain why maybe some people can believe that they can influence events with their thoughts, right? Magical thinking, once again, magical thinking may not entirely be due to animism and animacy, but here it seems that we believe that our thoughts can affect the world. So if I have the right thought, like go team, and then my team scores a goal, it might feel like I helped, like I was sending the right vibes and the team picked it up and scored a goal or something, right? Or, my Wheel of Fortune example, when people say, hey, big money, and they spin the Wheel of Fortune and then it lands on like, I don't know, like $10,000. They might feel like I did that. I made the wheel stop. Of course, that would be cheating, right? Like, imagine if psi powers were real. That's another thing we couldn't do. We couldn't have Wheel of Fortune because people would just be like making the wheel stop with their powers, and you couldn't play Wheel of Fortune. So yeah, I agree. Jean-Francois, I agree. Vibes are important, but vibes aren't. I'm a physicalist about vibes. So So okay, and maybe you got like a nagging question after all of this, and if you've read the entire chapter and you also read about Benjamin Liebei's experiments on the readiness potential, then you might be worried that you don't have free will, right? That's kind of what it sounds like. Even if we take like, for example, Jim Davies' class, Mysteries of the Mind, he says, so 40% of our actions are unconscious habits, automatic behaviors. Even if we just take 40%, that's a lot of that's a lot of stuff that we're not free with regard to, right? But then it really depends on what you mean by free will. Like, do you mean like libertarian free will, where you are just like metaphysically not subject to these deterministic laws because you were created by God or something, right? That's why the question of freedom of the will has been a perennial question in philosophy, is because not only do we want to know if we have it, but if we don't have it, what would that mean for things like moral responsibility? But on libertarian free will, I can still be morally responsible because I'm not determined, right? The opposite of that would be hard determinism. That's like Laplace's demon. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because when you don't want to watch a commercial, you really don't want to watch a commercial. Like if you're on YouTube and an ad comes up, I'm always like, I got to skip that real fast. But sometimes something catches my attention and it'll end up being like a 5-minute advertisement for a piece of farm equipment that I'm never going to buy or use. But it's just like, oh, wow, that's kind of a cool device. Like, so I don't know. Advertising is crazy. So does all this mean we don't have free will? Does it mean we ought to be determinists? I mean, I don't think so. The fact that we feel as though we have free will isn't convincing evidence for either of those conclusions. And this is kind of beyond the scope of this class anyway, right? All I'll say is that I am a happy compatibilist. And what that means is that I think that free will is compatible with the idea of a deterministic universe. And what I mean is that I am free in the sense that I could have always done otherwise, right? Like Richard Gregory said, I may not have free will in the hard, like super libertarian sense, but I do have free won't. No one's coercing me. No one's forcing me to do things. I can pick and choose. My options may be limited, but I still have some choice. Like I decided to get up and teach this class because I like it. There's nobody standing behind me with a gun saying, teach the class or I'll kill you, right? So I'm not being I'm not being coerced. Canfield, what's that? I actually don't know what that is. And well, Rebecca, that's a good point. We can change our habits. It takes effort, right? There are recovering drug addicts, okay? Like, so there are drug addicts and they've been addicted to, like, I don't know, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, something that's really addictive and bad for you. And some of them recover. That mean that's got to count for something. Granted, they often do it with a very big support network, but I'm not sure. I haven't read that. Yeah, I haven't read any Canfield. But compatibilism goes way back. Schopenhauer was famously a compatibilist. And yeah, only 21 to 28 days to form a new habit. I formed it. Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, I just decided that I needed to play more chess. So I got into a daily chess habit, and I've played chess every day since. I'm still bad at it, but I've got a habit, so I'll get better. Yeah, absolutely. You can totally form new habits. So yeah, I'm a compatibilist. I think I'm free in the sense that I'm not coerced. I mean, I'm certainly still determined by my biology, by the makeup of my mind, my psychology, my upbringing, society I live in. Obviously, I'm not going to argue that I'm not determined by those things, but I also still have some choice. I have enough that I can be held responsible for my actions, and that's what's important. And that's the other thing, is that most legal systems in developed countries are kind of premised on a compatibilist understanding of freedom, right? So how can all of this explain Ouija boards and seances? Well, I think it's quite obvious. But before we summarize those reasons, this is our second last slide. We got to talk about ghost hunting before we go. So I guess everybody watched that video either before class or during the break. And I'm just curious what everybody thought. Some have already said that it is creepy. I agree. I don't find it very creepy, but I think there are some creepy things in it. I can identify, the headless mannequin or that weird dog sculpture as creepy kinds of stimuli, right? So, but what does everyone else think? Dan.
I found it interesting. One of the top comments on the video was someone who said that they had such experiences themselves, but they found the way it was gone about in the video kind of confusing. Like, the idea that you need to go in the dark, you need to have all this equipment and stuff, and they just said that, well, if they're there, they're there. Like that's, you don't need all this other fancy stuff.
Yeah, like, why are ghost hunting shows always done at night? I mean, well, it's scarier at night. It's it's spooky. Like, there's stuff out there that could get you. And why is it always in a basement? It's not always a basement. Sometimes it's an attic, but it's always a space where, think about, what is a basement? Like, psychologically speaking, let's think about Freud. Like, what is a basement? A basement is a dark underground place where maybe you put stuff that you don't want anymore, or you have no use for. Basements are scary. They can be scary. Same with attics, right? Yeah, that's true, Andrea. That's a good point. If ghost hunting shows happened in the daytime, they wouldn't be as popular because they wouldn't be as scary and as compelling, right? Alexis, go ahead.
Yeah, the video was definitely interesting to look at, because I don't really watch a whole bunch of clips about this or shows, but I don't know exactly. I feel like there's a bit of a confirmation bias, just because they kind of know what to expect, in the sense, like, when they go, he's going to sit in the chair, he's going to wait to feel vibrations, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you were to tell random people to just go in this basement and that would be it, like, sure, if it's at nighttime, sure. I'm not sure if they would have the same experiences of saying, oh, I heard this, or I felt this when I sat here. Like, I feel like they're looking to find, they're confirm that these sort of phenomenon happen in the basement. But
yeah,
I
agree with that point. And I think that if you wanted to do, if you wanted to make ghost hunting actually scientific, what you would have to do is not have actual ghost hunters present in the location. You would want naive participants, just like any other scientific experiment, right?
Yeah.
And you'd want to make sure that you varied things, that you had a diverse pool of believers and non-believers, and then you could do some interesting statistical analysis to see who had which experiences and how they might best be explained. But that's, yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it is confirmation bias, where you tend to be on the lookout. You remember things that support your worldview, and you kind of ignore or forget the other things. And these ghost hunters are just, I mean, this isn't meant to be like an ad hominem against them, but many of them are just very biased in this way. So that's a problem. That's why we do science and we have all these methodologies, because scientists are not immune to this. And if you have a method that will tell you that what's going on, irrespective of your bias, that's what you need. And the ghost hunters don't do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it was a really interesting video. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, no worries. Dan has an interesting point. Many scientists are far less neutral than they claim to be. Yeah, I can see that. I can see why that impression is there. And certainly there are scientists who are dismissive, I would say outright dismissive of paranormal claims. I'm not, but that's not because I think we're going to find something. I think that science should engage with paranormal claims, because if scientists don't, amateurs will. And then you have ghost hunters and finding Bigfoot and all of that, right? So I think scientists need to engage with this stuff, because we're doing a disservice to people by not doing that. But it's true. Some scientists seem to be incredibly dismissive of these claims. They're not, they don't seem neutral. Like you've got your Susan Blackmore type figures who, or like the Rhines, who took an honest crack at it, and maybe we didn't find anything. So, okay. But some scientists will just say, ghosts, bullshit, you know, and they might seem very dismissive. As a scientist, though, I can sympathize with them, because you go through years of training to be a scientist, like years. Not all of my training was in the sciences, but I did 4 years of undergrad, 2 for a master's degree for philosophy, and then 5.5, 6 years for a PhD. So that's a lot. You put all that in, and then some guy comes along with an EMF meter and a Ouija board and says, I have evidence for ghosts. There is a sort of like urge to smack that like happens, you know. So, you know, I'm not like, again, the point of being skeptical is not to be dismissive. So if there are dismissive scientists, that's not a good thing. Skepticism is about doubt. And if what you are doubting survives that doubt, then you have knowledge, right? So that's great, right? Rebecca says, it's hard to believe these ghost hunter shows without being there and experiencing it yourself. Yeah. What's to say that they, didn't add in noises to make it more exciting for the viewers? Yeah, as we've seen in mediumship, there are cases of fraud. It's certainly plausible that there are cases of fraud when it comes to hauntings and investigating them, right? Yeah. Jean-Francois makes a good point about removing the music. And this is my gripe with American reality shows in general. They always put like too many dumb sound effects and like crappy dramatic music. Like I'll give you an example. This isn't anything to do with the paranormal, but like the other day I was watching Kitchen Nightmares on YouTube with Gordon Ramsay. And I love the UK version, the original version, because it's just, you know, Gordon shows up like, yo, right, you can't cook, you know, and he does this thing and then they go, and there's no drama. It's other than, you know, you got to fix your kitchen. But then in the American one, there's all these dumb sound effects and silly music and a really like annoying voiceover, like Gordon just found rancid scallops in the kitchen, like dum. And all American reality TV is like this. To the point where like I can't really watch it. I mean, yeah, and ghost hunting shows do that. Absolutely. They add in stuff. So I'm going to have to try Rebecca's suggestion and watch a scary movie on mute. Well, I think it would depend on the scary movie. I'll tell you what, like, I watched Psycho back in the day, and everybody knows the iconic shower scene from Psycho, right? The stabby stab. And they can't actually show any stabbing because it's back in the day when you couldn't show any of that. There was no gore. There was no blood. Even having the blood in the shower, people were like, oh my God, you can't do that in a movie, you know? But Alfred Hitchcock does it anyway. And the music is just so iconic. And so like, I know like I'm going to watch this and I'm not going to be scared. Not at that scene, but there were some jump scares in Psycho that I thought like, this movie's not going to jump scare me. It's Psycho. It's so famous. Everyone knows it. How could it scare me? There's that one moment where the investigator is coming up the stairs and Norman Bates comes out dressed as his mother, like all of a sudden, and just stabs him and he falls down the stairs. And that's one of the only times in a horror movie when I was like, whoa, like I don't jump scare easily, but that was one time. But of course, a big part of Psycho is that iconic music, the strings, the string sections and the dissonant intervals they're playing at, you know. Oh, I'm gonna have to do this. I need this for my YouTube videos. Like today we're gonna talk about metaphysics, explosions, like you know.
It's the water horn effect. Yeah, it's so you hear it all the time.
That's great. But yeah, it's true. Like oh yeah, and cliffhangers before the commercial breaks. Like I even saw this one clip because I'm researching for the cryptozoology lecture, and I find this one like Bigfoot destroys trail cam. I'm like, oh, a Bigfoot? Maybe they got it on camera, you know? So, and the guy's just like, oh yeah, my camera's broken. Scratches on trees. I think this was a bear. And then he goes back to his tent and his tent's torn apart and like, my tent, probably a bear. The bear didn't eat my trail mix though, so it might be Bigfoot, but it's probably a bear. So like, there's also a lot of clickbait stuff now too. But yeah. Bigfoots are just always out of focus. That could be it. But we'll talk about this next time because we're going to talk about the famous film and all the different lines of evidence. I'll tell you one thing that stood out to me. Well, there were two things that stood out to me about this video, and that was that the presenters were almost a little too open-minded. I don't think they were very convinced, but they were just like, yeah, sure. It could still be a ghost. But I don't know. I mean, I didn't think we were getting enough skeptical due diligence from them. Right. You know, they went with the ghost hunters and did some ghost hunting, but they didn't talk to a skeptical paranormal investigator after and stick that on the end, right? Another thing that always stands out to me in these videos is the equipment that people use. And you may have seen people with in that video with like a little scanning device called an EMF meter. And what an EMF meter is designed to do, I think I might have watched that one too. I might have watched a BuzzFeed Unsolved one about ghosts. I can't remember. I watched so many of these videos last night. They're all mixed up in my mind, but or maybe it was a Vice News thing. Yeah, I can't remember, you know. Anyway, the equipment they use, like EMF meters, they'll use this and pick up variations in electromagnetic radiation and say that that is due to a ghost. But I mean, can you guys see how that might be a little problematic? Right? I mean, an EMF meter is not made for finding ghosts. It's made for measuring electromagnetic fields. And there was one point in this video where he put his EMF meter on the chair, and he had another electrical device sitting right beside it on the chair. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. Sometimes also, and they did this in this video as well, they record either ambient noise in the premises, or they could take the output of the EMF meter and convert that to audio and listen to the audio. It would sound like static, but then they would hear words. One word they heard was pops, I believe. That they heard someone said pops. Who can think of remember parsimony, remember the principle of parsimony. So we've got an explanation. There exists a ghost named Pops who is attempting to communicate with the ghost hunters. And that would require a lot of assumptions that violate what we already know about the way the world works. Assumptions that violate the principles of naturalism, like the idea that the soul survives death, is immaterial, but can still interact with material things. Okay, so that's one explanation with a lot of assumptions. What are some other explanations with fewer assumptions? Anybody? We learned about it last time. It starts with the letter A. One type of this is called pareidolia.
I'm really thinking of what it could be. I'm not thinking about A, so it's either like anomalistic or like animacy. So
oh, okay. Daniel says the soap bubbles thing. Yeah, that's pareidolia, which is a type of apophenia. Apophenia is when you mistake noise for signal, when you see meaningful patterns in meaningless data. So if I take the output of my EMF meter and convert it to an audio signal, I take those waves and convert it to an audio signal, you know, maybe I'll hear what sounds to me like a name, but which is actually not a name. But my brain looks for patterns. You know, that's how we've survived. Brains didn't evolve for us to be correct about the world, you know. Brains evolved so that we could survive in the world. That's why we get a lot of stuff wrong. But yeah, apophenia might explain that. Daniel, go ahead.
I have a question. So I guess I don't really understand how apophenia is really an explanation, because it seems like to me when you say that's apophenia, all you're just saying is you're wrong. That's not what happened, right? Like there isn't that sound doesn't have the cause you think it does, right? It's not really providing like an explanation in the sense of saying like this is what caused it, right? It's just saying you're wrong about what caused it. Like it's not meaningful.
Yeah. Well, if you wanted to look at what does cause, like actually causes the signal, EMF meters can also detect, I mean, they're detecting stuff that's going on all around the house, and they can also pick up radio signals too. So it could have also been the case, and this is another plausible explanation, that Pops was just a bit of a radio signal bouncing off of something and hitting the EMF meter. Of somebody literally on like the airwaves saying pops. That's another plausible explanation with fewer assumptions than the ghost explanation, because that's the key. This is an exercise in applying the principle of parsimony, right? But as far as how could you tell, well, it's not like I'm making a truth claim. Like if somebody says they hear words in static, and they make a claim about the cause of that being a ghost, I mean, I'm not really trying to make a different truth claim about what actually caused it. What I am doing is trying to say that that's an unparsimonious leap you've made from I heard something to ghost, right? There are other more likely explanations for what you heard. That's what I mean to say with that. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that, Rebecca, but I have seen artifacts in cameras that people think are ghosts. I've seen like orbs in photos, and I've seen like light trails. I actually have my partner's cousin came to visit once, and they went to I think it was like the old Ottawa, the old jail, supposed to be haunted in Ottawa. There's a lot of like purportedly haunted locations in Ottawa, by the way. The museum down by the locks is supposed to be haunted. The Chateau Laurier is supposed to be haunted. You can go on those haunted walk tours. Might be fun. Yeah, I would do it. I would do it if there were people who wanted to put something like this together at the end of class, and we all kind of go as a group on a haunted walk. Absolutely. We'll bring our EMF meters and our night vision goggles and go on a haunted walk. I think that would be a lot of fun. I really do. Even though I don't think there's ghosts, I think that would still be fun. So what was I saying? Oh, it's gone now. I forgot what I was talking about. Oh, camera artifacts, right. These are easily explained by optics. And I've had people show me, like the visitor, my partner's cousin who was down visiting, showing me pictures that she took in the jail, which is of course dark, which means that your shutter speed is going to be slow. And when you have a slow shutter speed on your camera, whether it's a digital camera or an SLR camera or any kind of camera, the longer the shutter is open, the longer your exposure is going to be, which means you're going to get orbs and light trails and different artifacts that are just due to the way light and cameras work. So she's showing me this. Look, is that a ghost? That's your camera. Like, and I almost felt bad, like, because she really believes in ghosts. But I was like, that's just camera. That's how cameras work, you know? Someone else, an old friend of the family who, she was very into the paranormal, but with understandable reasons. This was a person who she had beaten cancer, and then she was in remission for a long time. The cancer came back, and she got into a lot of spiritual stuff. You know, kind of like, you know, again, when you have a worldview, it helps defend against the fear of death, right? If you have a worldview, and her worldview just happened to involve a lot of paranormal new age stuff, and you know, she'd do things like tarot cards and stuff like that. But then she showed me this one picture on digital camera. She was sitting in front of the Christmas tree, and all the lights had trails on them, and it looked like there was another person, like a blurry person off to the side. And it's like, look, that's the ghost. That's your camera. Like, I'm sorry, but that's you didn't have a fast enough shutter speed, and that's what happened. I'm sorry. So the one other thing about this that kind of strikes me, and I won't talk about it too much, because it's actually something that we'll have occasion to discuss a lot more when we talk about cryptozoology and UFOs and aliens. But of course, a huge part of this is the sense of community that I think people get, right? Like, I don't believe in ghosts. I still think it would be cool to go on a haunted walk tour. I think it would be fun to say that I've spent the night in a haunted house, you know, just so that they can be like, yeah, I slept in that haunted house. It was nothing, you know, like, it's an adventure. It's like an adventure you have with your friends, and that's fun. So I think that explains the appeal of these things. You get a community, you know. Not everyone's on a sports team or in a band or in a club. Some people go looking for UFOs. Some people go hunting Bigfoot. And as far as that goes, I think it's harmless. I think the more problematic stuff is like the mediums who want lots of money to try and contact a dead loved one. I think that's a little more morally problematic. So you have an amazing sense of community that comes out of this stuff. And you also have tourism. Have you ever noticed that most of the places that the ghost hunters go are tourist destinations. They're old hotels, they're old theaters, they're old landmarks. It's tourists, it's tourism. As a matter of fact, it's a particular type of tourism called dark tourism, which I was actually speaking to a professor in the School of Business at Carleton, and she researches dark tourism. So I was asking her a little bit about that, and I think I'd like to pick her brains a little bit more about dark tourism because it's fascinating. Oh yeah, ghost hunter equipment. You know, try to buy your stuff from a just a regular science gadget guy, not a ghost hunter store, because they'll mark it up. I don't know the Cecil Hotel story. Does anyone want to Rebecca or someone else want to share the Cecil Hotel story? Yeah, why don't we do, yeah, that would be great. If you want to pop a link on the Discord server, and then whoever wants to check it out can do so. I think that would be great. Thank you. Any other thoughts about ghost hunting or about mediums before we wrap up? Everyone seems pretty good. So I think this was good. What we had a lot. We were able to talk about quite a lot today, and you know, one of the things we've seen is that psychic mediums can behave dishonestly, and people can also be mistaken, right? There's definitely been cases of fraud in mediumship. The Fox sisters openly confessed. Eusapia Palladino was caught. William Hope, the spirit photographer, was busted. Peter Popoff was busted. We know fraud happens, but we also know that people can be mistaken. I do think that there are some mediums out there who genuinely believe they do have powers. I think there are some who don't think they're frauds, and I don't mean that they've convinced themselves that, like, they started out fraudulent and did some kind of mental gymnastics and have now convinced themselves that what they're doing is okay. I don't mean that. I do think that there are some people who think they have legit supernatural powers and are just honestly mistaken, right? And that probably has to do with confirmation bias and stuff. You know, you have an anomalous experience, you remember it, you attribute it to some kind of special ability, and you forget all the other times when nothing happens, right? So, and you know, there is something very powerful about communicating with the dead, about that prospect, right? If we have souls that survive death, and we were able to establish this scientifically, that would be the biggest paradigm shift in the history of paradigm shifts, right? It would change our understanding of the natural world, the universe. It would change our understanding of metaphysics. It would change the understanding of how we ought to live our lives. And, you know, the idea of communicating with a loved one that you've lost is certainly compelling. Grief can make people do desperate things, right? Including giving money to people who will claim to contact your dead loved one when probably what they're doing is just cold reading or hot reading or any number of other things that a mentalist can do. So yeah, that's very compelling. And I know that that was in the example of the old family friend I mentioned who used to believe in ghosts. I really think that belief in this kind of thing was part of a worldview that served as a defense against the fear of death. And unfortunately, a number of years ago, she did pass away. But she did have this medium reading. This reading is just right. It's not too hot or too cold. Yeah, so I definitely in that case, this stuff guards against that angst, right? The anxiety over your doom, which happens to all of us. So, I say, don't worry about it. Don't worry about life. No one gets out of it alive. So it's fine. We also learned that in spite of these drives that we have toward believing in life after death, that there are simpler, more parsimonious explanations of what occurs when we hold a seance or have a Ouija board session. And, maybe for these reasons, we can see now why the Rhines didn't examine paranormal phenomena that concerned life after death, right? They didn't look at spirit mediums. They didn't look at evidence for ghosts. Probably because I think there was just so much fraud going on in the spiritualist movement. And I think that if modern day paranormal researchers want to be scientific, they need to do the same thing. So ghost hunters can't go in, already sure that there is a ghost there and then look for evidence for it. What are they doing if they do that? They're verifying. And as we've learned, verification isn't how we test scientific claims. What we have to do is try and falsify scientific claims instead. And also, they have confirmation bias. They can cherry pick evidence. And this can be done consciously and maliciously, or innocently and unconsciously. So that's why ghost hunting is suspect. But as far as what's more morally problematic, I think probably mediumship. Because mediumship is where you have people like, I'll talk to your dead loved ones, give us your money. Might be fine if it's a celebrity who's got money to burn. But if it's a desperate person who's just lost their partner or a child or a parent and who doesn't have a lot of money, I don't know. There's something slimy about that to me. So next time, cryptozoology. Again, chapter 2, the chapter on Bigfoot is the one you want to focus on. But the other chapters are informative and they're also helpful and in that they bear on a lot of the other stuff that we've discussed so far, like ghost hunting today or UFOs, which we'll discuss next week. So for Thursday, yeah, you'll probably just want to stick to that one chapter, but, skim the other ones. They're very interesting. And I'll see you all then. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good class. Bye for now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, everyone.